In this exercise, we will create a basic bare-bones component upon which we can build in subsequent exercises. The component in this exercise will display text on the website. The Joomla component for the public-facing side of the website is located in the Components folder. The components are each in a subfolder using the naming convention com_component name. For this exercise, we will name our component GoodCook. First, let's create the folder com_goodcook as a subfolder of components. Every subfolder in Joomla's folder structure contains a blank index.html file. Let's simply copy one of these blank files into our folder. There is one required file for the front-end component, a PHP file using the component name. In our exercise, this will be goodcook.php in the com_goodcook folder. In the PHP file, we will use this code for now. All Joomla PHP files begin with defined or die to ensure that the code can only be executed by the Joomla system. The Joomla components for the administrator side of the site are located in administrator/components. As with the site component, it is located in a subfolder named com_goodcook. For the purpose of this exercise, we will copy the site's goodcook.php file to the admin component folder for now. In addition to the blank index.html file, we will need two files for this folder, goodcook.php, goodcook.xml. The XML file gives the Joomla installer information it needs to install the component. We will use this basic information in our XML file. We begin with the extension tag, and within the extension tag we have the name of the component, the description, creation date, author, license, version number. Then we have a files tag listing the file names and folders. Next we have the administration tag, which contains the menu name, and the files tag with the file names and folder names. Now we will package these for installation. Outside of your site file structure, create a folder for your installation package. This folder will contain two folders, Site and Admin. Zip up the Site and Admin folders. Go to your Joomla Sites Administrator control panel. Click on Extensions, Extension Manager, and upload this installation package. You will now see GoodCook on the Components drop-down. Now go to your website's front end and type index.php option equals com_goodcook. You will see your Hello World text. In this exercise, we will add a database table with sample data to our installation package. In the Administrator Components com_goodcook folder, add a new folder named SQL. Add the blank index.html file to this folder. Create a file named install.mysql.utf8.sql containing the following code. Our table contains three fields, ID, title, and recipe. And we're inserting two sample recipes. Please note that SQL files must use UTF-8 encoding without BOM, byte mark order. If we want the table to be dropped during an uninstall process, we can create a file named uninstall.mysql.utf8.sql with this code. The #_ will automatically be replaced by the Joomla installer with our table prefix as defined in our configuration.php file. In the XML file, we will need to add the install and uninstall tags. These tags will point to our SQL files. We'll also need to add the SQL folder under the admin folders. Now let's recreate the installation package and test our database install. In the admin folder, add the SQL folder and replace the XML file with the updated XML file. And rezip the folders. We will uninstall the component from the previous exercise and then reinstall the new one we just created. Now let's open phpMyAdmin and see if the new database table installed properly. Here's our new table. Now we can have our component retrieve data from here and display it on our website. We will do this using the Model View controller in the next exercise. In this exercise, we will set up the Model View controller to access database table. Models retrieve and process data for views. Views format data for display. Controllers direct Joomla to load the correct models and view for a request. To begin, open components/com-goodcook/goodcook.php. We are going to remove the hard-coded HTML and extend the JController legacy class. Replace the current code with the following. We leave out the closing PHP tag when the file ends in PHP code because any inadvertent whitespace will be rendered by the browser. When controller instantiates the class object GoodCookController, Joomla will look for it in components/com-goodcook-controller.php. So let's create a file with that name and add the following code to it. We have named the default view as Recipes, which will display a list of recipes. So let's create a view folder which has a subfolder named Recipes. In the Recipes folder, we will create a file named view.html.php. Here we will gather data, then set the template for the Recipes view. The basic code we will set up in view.html.php for now and build upon later is, we can see in this code there are two more things to do. Set up the model for the getItems function and set up the template for the display. The default template for this view will be in a subfolder named tmpl in a file named default.php. In default.php, we will use this code. For the get function in view.html.php, we will set up a model. And within the models folder, create a file called recipes.php. Here is the code we'll use in the recipes.php file. Now we have the model, the view, and the controller, the MVC. We will copy these new files and folders to the administrator components com_goodcook as a placeholder so that we can install our new package and test it. Let's upload these new files and folders to our web server and check the results. Our website now displays the list of recipes from the database. Now that we are able to display a list of recipes from the database, we also will need to view the individual recipes. In the controller.php, we will add this line to get the ID of the recipe. Under components /com_goodcook/views, let's create another view, this one called Recipe. Copy the Recipes folder to Recipe. Open view.html.php and we will make the following changes. Notice that the class name is now Good Cook View Recipe instead of Good Cook View Recipes, and items is now item. Now we will open the tmpl/default.php under the recipe view and change it to display a single recipe. We also need to create a model for the recipe. Let's copy models/recipes.php to models/recipe.php. Now we will open it and make the necessary edits. The class is now Good Cook Model Recipe, and it is extending JModelItem instead of JModelList. Also, the function is getItem instead of getListQuery. Now get the ID of the recipe and add a where clause to the query. Set the query and return the data. You'll notice that in the recipes view, when we used getListQuery, that function returned an SQL query. This function returns a database object. Now we'll update the template to display the item rather than a list of item titles. You can upload these files to your server and test it by using this query string in your URL. Now that we have the recipe view working, let's add a link from the recipes list view to the recipe view. Open the default template for the recipes view. After the opening paragraph tag, add an anchor tag, and for the href element use jroute with the link to the URL. Now let's upload the modified files to the web server and view the results on the website. The links on our list of recipes are now clickable. And now we can view the full recipe. In this video, we will add a language file to translate the user visible strings and add menu types. In the language folder of Joomla, you will see a subfolder named en-gb. The first 11 files are for components and use the naming convention en-gb.com_nameofcomponent.ini. In administrator/language, you will see both a .ini and a .sys.ini for each component. We will create files in the language folders for Good Cook following this naming convention. We will use this code for the default.xml file. Notice there is no period or semicolon at the end of the lines. Save the file as UTF-8 encoding. Upload the new files to the website. Now if you go to the Joomla admin control panel and click on Components, the drop-down will now read Good Cook instead of Com Good Cook. In the installation package, we will need to add the tag Languages under both Site and Admin in goodcook.xml. As you can see from this code, our installation package will now have a language folder under Site and a language folder in the admin folder and contain the files listed. Now we will make a menu item type for the Good Cook component. In order to be able to add the recipes list or a recipe page to a Joomla menu, we will need an XML file in the template folder of the view folder. This is the code for the XML file. Upload the default.xml file and the updated language files to the site. Now try to add a menu item. When you click on Menu Item Type, you will now see Good Cook on the list of types available. Here is the menu item link on the website. This will take us to our list of recipes page. In this exercise, we will display the components data in an editable form on the Joomla Administrator site. At this point, the Administrator component should have the same files as the site component, plus the goodcook.xml installer file and the SQL folder. When we go to Components, Goodcook, in the Control Panel, we will see the same view we saw on the site. We will now add code that will display this data in forms so that we can then add the ability to add, delete, and edit the entries. Open Administrator, Components, Goodcook, Views, Recipes, Template Folder, and the file default.php. We will replace the existing code with the following. This code will output the list of recipes in an admin form along with the Joomla Forms token. This token helps protect against form spoofing. The link to edit the recipe is view equals recipe and layout equals edit. So we now need to create an edit.php under view recipe. We won't need the default.php file in this folder, so change the name of default.php to edit.php. Then open to edit it. We will replace the code with a form which makes the recipe editable. Now we will set up a model for the new edit form. Under the Models folder, open recipe.php. The Site Components model extended the JModel item class. Here we will use the JModel admin class. We'll keep the getItem function and add a getForm and loadFormData function. We will add a Forms folder within the Models folder, and a recipe XML file which will define the form fields with this code. A read-only text file for the ID, a text field for the title, and an editor field for the recipe. Let's upload the new files to the web server and view the results. The links on the recipe list now takes us to an edit form. In this exercise, we will add Save and Close buttons on the recipe form page of our admin component so that we can edit a recipe. In this process, we will also look at various error messages and what they require for resolution. In Administrator Components, Goodcook, Views, Recipe, View.html.php, add this code to build the toolbar. Now add the function addToolbar to the class. This function will call the JToolbar helper, which will create the buttons for us. Let's upload this file and take a look at the edit form now. The title of the page is there now, and so are the Save and Cancel buttons. If we had uploaded a recipe.png file, that image would show next to the title. But our buttons are not clickable yet. We need to add some JavaScript to the form. Let's open edit.php and add this code for JavaScript. And now let's upload the file. So now the buttons are clickable, but they return an error message. Joomla is looking for a new controller named Goodcook Controller Recipe. So let's create it in a new folder, Controllers, in recipe.php. We are not putting permissions checking into the component yet, so we will return true for these checks. Let's upload this and check again. Now we are experiencing a new error. Table recipe not supported, file not found. So now Joomla is looking for a tables folder with a recipe.php file. Let's create that file and use this code. In the check function, we have added code to validate that a recipe title is being saved to the database. And to the recipe model, add the getTable function. You will see that prefix and type come from the table class named GoodCookTableRecipe. We've come to our last and final error. This error appears because the link to the page needs task equals recipe.edit. Let's open Recipe's default template and add and task equals recipe.edit in the link to the edit form. Now we'll try one last time. Item successfully saved. Our recipe now has a new title. In our next exercise, we will add new and delete buttons to the list of recipes screen. In this exercise, we will add new and delete buttons and pagination to our admin component. The new and delete functions are initiated from the screen that shows a list of items. So let's open the administrator components, ComGoodCook, views, recipes, view.html.php file. We will add the same function to set the toolbar as we did in the single recipe view, and the call to the function. Clicking the new button will open the same recipe form we used for editing but with empty fields. So in the model for recipe, we will return an empty data object if there is no ID in the input. Open models recipe.php and add this code in the getItem function. Now we will add a controller for recipes. Copy the recipe controller and make the following changes. Change recipe to recipes and jcontroller form to jcontroller admin. And add the getModel function. So let's upload these new files and test them out. Go to the recipes list page, click on New. We'll add a recipe and save it. The new recipe is now on the list. Let's try the delete button. Select the new recipe and click delete. It is now removed. We only have 2 recipes on the list now, but as the list grows, we will want to add pagination. This is very easy to accomplish with Joomla. In the recipes view.html.php file, when we get the items, we can also get the pagination and assign it to our data object. In the recipes template file, view recipes template default.php, we will add code to display this pagination object, as well as a hidden field telling the script we are using the recipes view. Let's upload these changes to the website. We won't be able to see the pagination until we have more items on the list. So let's add some dummy text using phpMyAdmin just for testing purposes. Let's view the list again. The pagination is now displayed at the bottom and the links are working as expected. In our next video, we will add categories for our recipes. In this exercise, we will add categories for our recipes. Most components will need to have categories for organizing their data. Joomla has simplified this by having all components use the same table for categories, so we won't have to build our own table. In the extension column, it tells us which component is using that category row. If we look at the content table, we see a column named Cat ID, which is the naming convention used for storing the category ID from the categories table. Our recipes table does not yet have a Cat ID column, so we'll add one now. The name is Cat ID, the type is integer, length is 10, default is 0, unsigned, index. Now we will add categories as a submenu to recipes so that we can begin adding categories. We will use a helper file for adding a submenu. Create a folder named helpers containing a file named goodcook.php. Use this code in the helper file. Now we will add this helper file in the controller.php. In the recipes view file, view.html.php, we will get the sidebar menu by calling the add submenu function we just created in the helper file. In the recipes template file, default.php, we render it using this code. Let's upload these files to the web server and take a look. We have a category screen but no buttons for editing. We will use an access.xml file for this. Create access.xml in the comgoodcook folder with this code. On the recipe form, we need to add the category field to assign the recipe to a category. Open Models, Forms, Recipe.xml, and add the field tag. And in template edit.php, add this code to display the form output. So now we will upload our changes and try it again. We see there's now a drop-down for the category. One more thing we will do is to show the category on the list view. In Models Recipes.php, replace Query Select with this code. And in the Recipes template, we use a div tag with the class small. Let's view these updates on the site again. We have now successfully completed adding categories to our items. In our next exercise, we will add categories to our site component. In our previous exercise, we added the ability to add categories to the recipes. In this exercise, we will do the same for the site component. The site component does not yet know about the categories. The default view is recipes, so let's open that model first. In the getListQuery function, we will include the category in the query. Now let's open the recipes view template and add the category name to the output. We'll replace the paragraph tags with a table and add the pagination to the table footer. Let's remember to create the pagination object that we are displaying in the footer. Open the recipes view.html.php file and get the pagination object. Our list of recipes now includes the category name, and if we have more than one page, it will show the pagination. Let's also create a menu link that will display only recipes from a selected category. Copy the Recipes View folder and rename it Category. Open the default.xml under Category View template. Rename the layout. And add this request field after the layout tag closes. Open view.html.php and rename the class goodcookViewCategory. Copy the recipes model file and rename it category.php. Rename the class goodcookModelCategory. We will also need to add code to select only those recipes in the requested category. Add this to get the category ID. And this where clause. Now let's create a menu item link for the category view. Open Main Menu, create a new menu item, select Good Cook Category View. Select a category. Now let's check this on the site. Our menu now shows a link to the list of recipes in this category. Let's also create a menu item link that will display a list of categories to choose from. Copy the Recipes View folder and rename it Categories. Open the default.xml under Category View template. Rename the layout for Good Cook Categories view. Open view.html.php and rename the class Good Cook View Categories. Open the Categories template file, default.php, and use this code to display the list of categories. Copy the Recipes model file and rename it categories.php. Rename the class Good Cook Model Categories. Update the query to get a list of categories used by Good Cook. Now let's create a menu item link for the Categories view. Open Main Menu, create a new menu item, select Good Cook Categories view. Now let's check this on the site. Our menu now shows a link to a list of categories for Good Cook recipes. In this exercise, we will add some fields to our database table that are typical for Joomla components. For example, you will see that the Contact component has a tab for publishing options and metadata options. Go to your database and add the fields with these statements, inserting your prefix for the hash underscores. These fields also need to be added to the recipe forms XML file. The alias will be placed below the title. The metadata is placed within a field set tag which has a defined name. In the template, we will add the metadata fields in their own tab. To do this, we'll create a layout file for the recipe edit view, edit_metadata.php, and add this code. In the list of tabs, the unordered list class equals nav-tab, add a list item for the new tab, and then add the metadata content tab to the div that has the class tab-content. This will pull in the new template file, edit_metadata.php that we just made. And let's not forget to add the alias field to edit.php below the title. We now have everything in place to display the new tab and field on the edit form. Before saving the data, we need to add some processing for the new data fields. Open Tables, recipe.php. In the check function, we will set the alias and check for a duplicate alias in the same category. Check that a category ID is set. Clean up the meta keywords. And clean up the meta description. Now let's try out our new code. We'll create a new recipe, leave the alias field blank, fill in some keywords and a description, and save. Our alias field has been filled in for us, and the keywords and description are saved. Now we will do the same for publishing options, with fields for created by alias, created date, start publishing, and finish publishing. We'll add the publishing options to the forms XML file with these tags. Field set, we'll create a new layout file named edit_publishingoptions.php and add this code. To add the tab to the form, we modify edit.php. To our list of tabs, we will add a list item for the new tab, and we add the Publishing Options Good Cook tab to div class equals tab-goodcook. In tables recipe.php, we need to add some processing and checks before storing the data. In the check function, check that the publish down date is not earlier than publish up. In the store function, set the created at, created by for new records, and set the publish up and publish down to null if not set. Let's test this out on the website. When we save a new recipe, we now have a created date, created by, and if we set it, author's alias and start and finish publishing. Now that we have this working in the admin, in our next exercise, we will make use of these fields when displaying data on the site. In this exercise, we will apply the publishing options and metadata to the data that is displayed on the site. We will add a where clause to 3 files in the models folder: recipe.php, recipes.php, and category.php. In category.php, add this clause. In recipes.php, we will add the same where clause. In recipe.php, let's also get all the recipe fields, including the category title, in case we want to display it. And let's use the quote name function for good form. Now when we change the publish start or finish date, our recipe will not be displayed in the category list view. Another option we added in the previous exercise was the created by and created by alias. With these fields, we can display the recipe's author's name. We will need to join the users table to get the name, so let's put this code in both the recipe and category models as we did with the publishing dates. To test it out, let's add this output to the recipe template. Open Views, Recipe, Template, Default.php. Below the recipe output, add the created at and author using this code. We are simply outputting the variables created and author, and then adding some labels and HTML tags to format it. Now let's take a look. We have our submission info displayed. Now let's try the author alias. Fill in the alias as Super Chef. Now our author is displayed as Super Chef instead of Super User. For the recipe's metadata, we will display this on the recipe page. So in Views, Recipe, view.html.php, we will add this code. The document object has functions to set the meta description and meta keywords. We had instantiated the document object in controller.php. We see that the browser title is the name from the menu item. Let's append the recipe's title to this name. Get the current browser title using the document object function getTitle. Append the recipe title. Set the title using the document object function setTitle. In our next exercise, we will learn how to control the search engine-friendly URLs for our component. In this exercise, we will build a router to convert system URLs to search engine-friendly URLs. Let's create a new file in our site component folder named router.php. The first function will be named goodcookBuildRoute and takes the URL query string in an array to build the SEF URL. The second function will be named goodcookParseRoute and will take the segments from the SEF URL and change it back into a query array. We will need to add the alias to the JRoute links in the templates. Instead of and ID equals item ID in the URL, we need and item equals item ID, item alias. We will format this in the query as the variable slug, so let's remove the integer cast and replace the ID alias with slug. In the recipes model, add this case statement to the query to format the slug. Let's do the same in the category model and categories model, and update the JRoute in the corresponding templates. So now all our JRoute links show the alias in the URL. We can clean up the URL a bit more by removing the view. Instead of myrecipe/recipe/1chocolate let's take out the view, recipe, and replace it with the category slug for desserts, so that our URLs also show the category for each recipe. In the model for recipes, add another case statement, this time to get the category slug. Add this cat slug to the model for category also. In the recipes template, add cat ID equals cat slug to JRoute. Now we'll do the same in the category template. In the router in build route function, We will add the cat ID to the segments instead of the view. We still need to unset the view variable, otherwise it will be added to the URL. This causes a problem for the parseRoute function. ParseRoute no longer has a view segment. ParseRoute needs to find another way of determining which view the link is using. We will use this code to get the view set at the menu item and also the segment count. This code will use the menu item view as the view, except in the case of category and categories, where we will need the segment count to determine if the link is for a category or recipe. 2 segments indicates it's a recipe, the first segment being the category ID and the second segment being the recipe ID. So now let's take a look at our URLs. In the next exercise, we will introduce a publish field to our component. In this exercise, we will add and use the publish field, which is very helpful for probably every component. Add the field to the database table with this statement. On the admin lists view, we will add a checkbox to change the publish status. Open Views, Recipes, Template, Default.php. Add a column in the table head for status, just before the title. And in the table body, add the column. You'll see that this code needs the data from published, publish up, and publish down to determine which icon to display. So let's update the model for recipes to include these fields in the select statement. Now we see we have a column for the published date and the buttons are clickable. In the recipe view, let's show the published information in the sidebar. We will add the sidebar code in edit.php after the last field set and the div closing tag following that. Now we have a sidebar, but the published input and label are not showing because they are not in the form object yet. Let's open Forms, Recipe.xml, and add in the published field within the first field set. Now we have a published drop-down in our edit page. Let's go back to our list view and add the Publish and Unpublish buttons to the toolbar. And if it's not already there, add the call to the helper in the display function. So now there are Publish and Unpublish buttons in the toolbar, and we can select multiple recipes and publish or unpublish them all at once. Our last step is the most important. We need to prevent unpublished recipes and categories from being displayed on the site component. We have 4 models in the site component. We will open each one and make sure that there is a where clause of published equals 1. Categories.php only selects from the categories table, and we already have the publish clause there. In category.php, recipe.php, and recipes.php, we will add this line. Let's test it out. We'll unpublish a recipe and publish the other. Let's look at our list of recipes on the site. Only the published recipe is showing. Now we have more control over the publication of our data. In our next exercise, we will add a print and email option to our component. In this exercise, we will create print and email buttons for the component as well as an RSS feed. First, let's create a helper folder and an icon.php file in that folder to use for the print icon. We will use the HTML icon in this helper file with 3 functions, one to email the recipe, one to produce a print pop-up screen, and the third will print the pop-up screen. We are going to use a slug in this code, but we never put it in the recipe model because until now the single recipe view did not link elsewhere. So let's copy the case when and case when one from the recipes model to the recipe model. In our recipe template, we will add the same drop-down button that is used in articles for the print and email buttons. This code is using the this print, to determine if it is a print screen or the regular recipe page, so we need to assign a value to this print in view.html.php. So let's upload the new file and the changed files and test it out. We see our recipe page now has a print and email icon. If we click on the print icon, we get a print pop-up screen showing just the component layout without the modules, and with another print icon. This second print icon will bring up our printer dialog box. Let's test the email icon. Clicking this icon brings up a Mail To pop-up. When we fill it out, it sends us a link to the recipe page. We will create an RSS feed link for the recipe category. The feed is located in a file named view.feed.php in the category View folder. So we will create this new file and add this code. This file gets the items for the category just as view.html.php does. Then for each item we'll create a jfeed item object, which formats it for an RSS feed. Some of the fields we are using for the RSS feed are not in the category model, so we will need to add them to the select statement. Open Models, Category.php. In Query Select, add Publish, Created, and Meta Description. The URL for the RSS feed will be the category page with additions to the query string of format equals feed and type equals RSS. In our next exercise, we will start developing modules for our component. Module files and folders are located in Joomla's Modules folder. Each module has its own subfolder named mod underscore and the name of the module. For this example, we will create a folder named mod underscore foo. The modules folder contains a minimum of 2 files, one PHP file and one XML file with the same name as the subfolder. mod underscore foo.php, mod underscore foo.xml. The PHP file requires minimum code as shown. This line of code ensures that the script will only be executed by the Joomla system and prevents someone from accessing the file directly. For our first example, we will output a simple line of HTML code. The minimum code for the XML file is the tag extension with the attributes type equals module, client equals site, and within the extension tag, the tags name, description, files, and within the files tag, the file name tags, listing each file in the module. The main PHP file will have an attribute module equals and then the name of the module, in this case mod underscore foo. We will start with this bare bones module and add more options later. Before we can use this module, we will need to register the extension in the database. We are going to let the Joomla installer do this for us. Create a zip file of the mod underscore foo folder and its files. Log into the Joomla's Administrator section of the website, go to Extensions, Extension Manager, upload the mod underscore foo.zip file and install. The module has now been registered in the database. Now we will publish the module. Go to Module Manager, select the foo module. Change the status to Publish and select the module position. Assign the module to all pages. Our new module is now displayed on our website. In this exercise, we will look at some of Joomla's form field types and apply them to our module. Form field types are entered in the module's XML file, in our example mod_foo.xml. Before we can enter any form fields, we will need the enclosing tags, which are config, fields, and field set. Admin entered text can use the fields text, text area, or editor. For the text field, this is the syntax for the tag and the 3 required attributes: type, name, and label. Let's also add in all the optional attributes. Description will show information to the user about the field when they mouse over the field's title. Max length will limit the amount of characters entered in the text field. Size is the width of the box in characters. Default is the default value of the text field. Some filter options can be safe HTML, raw, URL, and tell. In this case, we'll use safe HTML. The default class on all form fields is input box. For the text area field, we have the same 3 required attributes of type, name, and label. Let's also add in the optional attributes. For the editor field, a WYSIWYG editor will be provided for data entry. The required attributes are the same. And these are the optional attributes. You can use width and height or cols and rows to define the size of the editor box. Width and height are pixel values. The default value for width is 100%, and for height it is 250 px. For the editor, you can specify the editor and an alternate. The buttons attribute can either be set to false or list an array of buttons to exclude. Alternatively, you can use the hide attribute to list an array of buttons to hide. Before we test this out, let's add the language file tag. We will also need to create and upload the new language file to language/en-gb. So we will reinstall the module with the new files and tags and check out our new Basic Options tab. We have our text, text area, and editor fields with the name and description. The editor field is showing the Read More button, but not the page break, article, or image buttons, which we had asked to exclude or hide. In our next exercise, we will output the new data that we saved in our Options tab. In this exercise, we will process the data that is saved from the Basic Options tab. In mod_foo.php, we will remove the hard-coded HTML output. The data from the fields are saved in the modules table in the params column. To get the values of the data saved in the Basic Options, we will use the get function of params using the name of the form field. Rather than output the data in mod_foo.php, we will create an output template for the layout. JModule Helper will let Joomla know to look for the template file. Create the template folder and default file. We'll output the data array from mod_foo.php here. We don't yet have a module class suffix field, but we will put it in the template now to be added later. Now let's publish the module to the site and see what it looks like. Our saved data is now displayed on the site. Let's take a look at some other useful field types. The category form field will display a drop-down list of categories that belong to the specified component and return the value of the category ID number. Let's use this to display recipes from the Good Cook category. To help us create the list of linked recipes, we will use a helper file. So let's create helper.php in the modules folder. Here we will create the mod foo helper class with the getList function. This function uses the models from the GoodCook component, so we will include that path. In mod foo.php, we will now include the helper file and get the list from the helper. In our template file, let's output the list of recipes for the selected category. Now let's save our module and see what it outputs. Our module now displays the text entered in the text field along with the recipe from the selected category. The recipe link in the module may or may not work depending on which page you are on when you click it. If you're not on a GoodCook component page, it can't determine the view, so we need to tweak the router a bit. If there is no active menu item, assign the variable view as category. Change the switch statement to use the view variable. And now it works. In our next exercise, we will look at the module layout options and SQL form fields. In this exercise, we will look at two more form fields, module layout and SQL. Joomla has a module layout field that will let the admin choose from among whatever layouts are available in the modules template folder. So far we have only one layout, default.php. Let's create some alternate layouts. Copy default.php and rename it orderedlist.php, and copy it another time and name it unorderedlist.php. In orderedlist.php, we will add an ordered list tag to the output, and to unorderedlist.php, we will add an unordered list tag to the output. In modfoo.xml, let's create a new field set named Advanced, and add the module layout as well as the module class suffix. In modfoo.php, we will retrieve the module class suffix, which is already in our template, and add the layout to the getLayout path. Let's upload this to our site and check the results. We now have 3 layout options to choose from. Let's try out the ordered list. Now our module displays the recipe in a numbered list. The SQL form field is another very handy option. In our example, we will get a drop-down with a list of recipes to select from instead of the category. Key field is the value returned by the selection. Value is the value shown to the user. Now our drop-down shows a list of recipes to choose from. In modfoo.php, we will change the category list to an item and add a getList function to our helper file. And now in our template files, we will output the recipe instead of the list. Now let's save our module and check the output. Our recipe is now displayed in the module. Some other standard form fields that may be of interest are calendar, which provides a pop-up calendar for selecting a date, checkbox, list, which is a drop-down list of options, image list, which provides a list of image files from a specified folder, media, which will give the user access to the Media Manager to browse, upload, and choose an image file, integer, which provides a select box containing a range of integer values. In our next exercise, we will build a custom field type for our module. In this exercise, we will create a custom field type for our form. Joomla's form field types are in Libraries, Joomla, Form, Fields. We will extend the list field type to create our own set of dynamic options for the drop-down. We will store our custom field in Administrator, Components, COM-GoodCook, Models, Fields, GoodCook, Keywords.php. Any extension will be able to access and use this field in their code. We will override the getOptions method in JForm field list. We'll use this code to get our options for the dropdown. In this example, we are getting all the meta key fields from our recipes table and parsing them into an array of options. So now in our mod.foo.xml file, we will add the path to our new field in the field set tag, and the field as the field type Good Cook Keywords. Let's test this out on the site. We'll open our module in the Module Manager. In the Options tab, we have our keyword dropdown, whose values were populated from the recipes table in the database. Let's examine how this new field type can be used with other extensions. In our site component, we have a view called Recipes. Let's add this new field type to that view. And remember to add the field's path. Let's test it out on the site. Open Main Menu and the My Recipes link. Click on Advanced Options. We now have a keyword selector. We can also override the label for the field. Let's try adding an image under the label. In goodcookkeywords.php, we'll add the function getLabel. Here we are simply appending an image to the label tag. Let's test it. Now we see an image under the label named Keywords. If we want a dynamic label, we can replace the label in the getLabel function. Let's get the user's name from the user object and insert it into the label. Here we create the user object, then we get the current label. We make our new label using the name from the user object, and then replace the current label with the new label. Now let's check the results. The user's name now appears as part of the label. In our next exercise, we will begin our section on plugins. Joomla plugins are code that run when certain events take place. In this exercise, we will look at plugins that act on content articles. For our first plugin, let's insert a recipe into an article. We need two files for this, showrecipe.php and showrecipe.xml. The showrecipe.xml file is similar to the XML file for the module. Notice the type is now plugin and the group is content, so Joomla will install it in the plugins content folder. In the showrecipe.php file, we will extend the jplugin class. Notice the naming convention of plg plus plugin group plus plugin name. We will use the onContentPrepare method to search for show recipe tags in the article. If it finds a show recipe tag, the process function is run through preg replace callback. For every matching item in the text, it will call the process function in the plugin, passing it the recipe ID. In the process function, we will use the recipe model to get the text for the recipe. However, we need to pass to the model the recipe ID number, which is currently getting it from the ID in the URL query. So we will need to update the recipe model to accept an optional ID number. Now let's test this out on the website. We will zip the new files showrecipe.php, showrecipe.xml, and index.html. Open Extensions Manager and install. Now we will check that the plugin is published. Let's put two show recipe tags in an article to be sure it works with multiple tags. Save and view the article on the website. The article now contains the two recipes. Some events for content plugins include on content prepare, which we just did, on content after title, on content before display, on content after display. The context is where the event was called from. For example, you may want to run the plugin differently when the content is being called from the Smart Search component versus when it's being called from the content component. In our next exercise, we will create an editor button that will make it easier to insert tags into the articles. In this exercise, we will create a button for the WYSIWYG editor for inserting the Show Recipe tag. The editor buttons are located in Plugins, Editors-XTD. So let's create a folder named Recipe containing recipe.xml, recipe.php, and index.html. The XML file in this case is very simple. Notice that the group is now editors-xtd. In the recipe.php file, we extend jplugin and add our onDisplay method. OnDisplay will add the necessary JavaScript for a modal box listing all the recipes from which the user can select. Next, we create the button object and return it. Let's install this on the site and see what we have so far. Now we have an Insert Recipe button. Clicking it loads the Good Cook Recipes view as template equals component, ensuring that it loads just the component and not the modules. We're almost there. You'll notice in the URL link of the button, layout equals modal. We will need to create that layout to give us what we need for selecting an article in this manner. Go to Administrator, Components, Good Cook, Views, Recipes, Template folder and create a modal.php file. We add our function to the form and eliminate the unneeded columns. The link to the recipe becomes a JavaScript function call, so now when you select a recipe from the list, the button will process the selection. Now let's try this out on the site. When we click the Insert Recipe button, the Show Recipe tag is added for us with the correct recipe ID number, which we chose based on the title. The user no longer needs to look up the recipe ID before adding a Show Recipe tag. In our next exercise, we will add recipes to the site search. In this exercise, we will build a search plugin for the Good Cook component so that recipes will be included in the site's search result. In the Plugins folder, you will see there is a subfolder named Search, which has subfolders with component names. We will add a folder in Search named Good Cook. Our folder will contain 3 files, goodcook.php, goodcook.xml, and index.html. In the XML file, notice the extension element has the attribute group equals search. In the Fields tag, we will add a tag for a search limit field and a menu item field so that the admin can choose which item ID is to be used in forming the links. In the PHP file, we extend the jPlugin class. In the onContent Search Areas function, we will provide a name for our search area. In onContent Search, we first check to see if the user excluded Good Cook from the search parameters. If not, then we create the database application objects. We designate a name for our section, which will appear below the title of the recipe. We'll trim the text and get the plugin parameters. Next, we create the query's where clause, ordering, and select statement. For each row returned, we will format the link to the recipe using the item ID from the plugin parameters. So let's package our search plugin and test it out. Zip the files, upload through the extension manager. Now let's go to the plugin manager and set the parameters. We will leave the limit at the default setting. For the menu item ID, let's choose My Recipes, which is a page that displays links to recipe pages. Save and close. Now on the site, let's type About in the search field. 3 results are shown. Under Search Only, you will see Good Cook Recipes, which came from the areas array we set in the PHP file. You will see that chocolate sauce has Good Cook Recipes desserts below the title, which was set in our PHP file. The link to the chocolate sauce recipe is myrecipes/desserts/chocolate sauce because we set My Recipes as the item ID to use in the link. In our next exercise, we will create a Smart Search plugin for the Good Cook Recipes. In this exercise, we will build a Smart Search plugin for Good Cook Recipes. Smart Search plugins are located in the Plugins Finder folder. We will create a new subfolder named Good Cook. This requires 3 files in our folder. The requirements for our XML file are very minimal. In our PHP file, we will load the base adapter and extend the Finder indexer adapter. Next, we begin with 6 properties. The state field is the field in our database that is used to store the published state. The default is state, which is what content uses for articles. Some extensions, such as Good Cook, use the published field. We have the construct method. The first 3 methods we need to override are setup, index, and getList query. In setup, we can add a path to any helper files we have. We are going to need to make a simple route helper file to form the SEF URL, so we will require that file here. The getList query function will build the query to get the data from our table. The index function is the main method of the Smart Search indexer and will be called for each recipe index. First, we make sure that our component is enabled. This will load any content plugins. Next, we build the route. Here we pass the slug and cat slug to the route helper that we are going to create. Then we add metadata and taxonomy data for the indexer to store. We don't want to index any recipes whose category is unpublished. We will call getContentExtras to get any extras such as comments, tags, labels, etc. that should be available to the Finder from plugins that act on the onPrepare Finder content event. Now we index the item. Next, we will add 5 functions that update the index when there are modifications to the recipes table or the recipes categories. OnFinder after delete, OnFinder after save, OnFinder before save, OnFinder change state, and OnFinder category change state. Before installing our plugin, let's go back to our component and add that route helper file. Our Good Cook helper route will look for a menu item for that recipe. If it finds one, then that item ID will be used in the URL. If not, then if there is a menu item for the recipes category, it will use that. And lastly, if there is a menu item for the recipes view, it will use that item ID. So now let's package this plugin and install it. First, we need to make sure our plugin is published. Also, the Content Smart Search plugin needs to be published as well in order for the Finder to index content. Next, go to the Smart Search component and run the indexer. Now let's go to the Module Manager. We will publish the Smart Search module. Now let's try searching for sauce. You'll notice that the first search result is the one in which sauce appears in the title because that is the most relevant. In our next exercise, we will process content plugins in our Good Cook recipes. In this exercise, we will process content plugins from other extensions and display them in the Good Cook recipe. Open Components, Com Good Cook, Views, Recipe, view.html.php. First, we need to retrieve the default dispatcher. The dispatcher loads and executes plugins, so this is needed to trigger the content plugins. Next, we use JPlugin Helper to import the plugin data. Here we process on-content-after-title events. This will process on-content-before-display events. And this will process on-content-after-display events. Item and params are both passed by reference, so plugins are expected to make any changes they need directly to the content and parameters. So while we do not need to do anything to process changes, we must ensure that the data we send is in the format that plugins will be expecting. Our component does not currently have any parameters. However, we still must pass this data to the plugin, so we will need to add a parameter object. We are not using offset yet, so force it to 0 for the content plugin. Content plugins expect to receive fields for intro text and full text. Good Cook recipes use only one field for text, so we will use meta description for the intro and the recipe for full text. Now, because our Good Cook component expects text to be in the field recipe, we will then pull changes back into it before displaying the template. Let's try inserting a module into a recipe and see the results. We will open a recipe and use the Load Position plugin to insert the Most Read Post module. Now go to Module Manager and set the position for the Most Read Post to Most Read. Now let's see if our code works. The Most Read Post module is now showing within the recipe. Users can now use all types of third-party plugins to insert videos, photo galleries, forms, etc. into their recipes. Here are some examples. Video using All Videos plugin. Form using RS Forms. In our next video, we will begin the section on ACL. Our component does not have settings for optional ways to display data. In this exercise, we will add configuration options for the component. Configuration options are defined in a file named config.xml in the Administrator Components folder. Remember that this new file will need to be added to our install file. Let's start with the ordering field set options: primary order, secondary order, and order date. In order to view the options list, we will need a button on our admin component toolbar. In the admin components view.html.php file for recipes, we have our add toolbar function. We will add the options button to our toolbar. We now have an options button on our admin's toolbar. We'll select our options and save. These options are now stored in the extensions table in the params field. Now we need to actually implement these options by modifying the queries. To implement the recipe's ordering option, we will modify getListQuery in the site's category model. We get the component's parameters using JComponent Helper. Then we'll retrieve the individual parameter settings. And our switch statement will set the appropriate order by in the query. We will use this same code in the recipes model as well. Now let's test it out. Let's set the recipe to show by title reverse alpha order. Now when we go to the My Recipes link in the menu, it shows the recipes in reverse alphabetical order by title. For the Categories view, we will set the ordering for the list of categories in the Categories model. Now we can set our categories ordering, and the list of categories will display in the order selected. Let's make another Options tab for recipes that will change whether we show the author and publish date. In config.xml, we add the field set named Recipes, with options to show author and show publish date. We will now update our template file to show or not show the author and publish date. In view.html.php, we will get our component's parameters. In default.php, we will suppress the output of the author when the parameter for show author is hide, and we do the same for the publish date. We will now save the recipe parameters to the database and view it on the website. In our next exercise, we will use the configuration options at the menu item level. We have configuration settings for the component, but we don't have a way to override them on the menu item level. In this exercise, we will add menu item options, which will override the component configuration options. We are going to override the recipe's parameters show author and show publish date on the menu item level. We have a view for recipe but not a menu item, so let's create the default.xml file for this first. We'll put in an SQL field for selecting a recipe, and then the recipe parameters show author and show publish date, which are also on the component level. Notice that here we have a third option in addition to hide and show, which is use global. Now we will open the recipes view.html.php file. We will merge the component parameters with the menu parameters. Copy the component parameters into menu params for merging. Find the active menu. Check to see which parameters should take priority. If the current view is the active item and the recipe view for this recipe, then the menu item params take priority. Otherwise, the current view is not a single recipe, so we merge with the recipe parameters taking priority here. Now to test this, add a new menu item called Featured Recipe and select one of the existing recipes to be featured. For featured recipes, choose to not display the publish date, while in the global settings do display the publish date. Compare viewing a recipe from clicking on the menu item link as opposed to from the recipes list view. Our menu item settings now have overridden the component settings. For the recipes and category XML file, we will add similar code for field options. And in the recipes model, we will add similar code to merge the options. And in the category model, we are now able to override our component parameters in the menu item links. In our next exercise, we will implement Joomla's ACL into our component. We need a way to control access to the component on the site and the administrator area. We will implement Joomla's ACL in our component. First, we will set up an access file for the site, access.xml. In addition to the core actions, we will add an action named recipe.view. To make this visible on the component's admin screen, we will open config.xml and add the permissions field set. We also need to put in a permissions check on the front end's recipe view. So let's open the component's recipe view.html.php file and add this code for checking. Now when we view the permissions in our component options, we see view as an option. It currently is not allowed by default. If we go to the website and try to view the recipes as anyone other than a super user, we will not be allowed. Let's allow registered users to view the recipes. Now when we log in, we can see recipes. Let's create a new group with access to recipes called subscribers. Subscribers will be a child group of registered. Now we can disallow registered and allow subscribers so that viewing recipes requires its own access level. Now being logged in as registered does not give us access to the recipes on the site, and logging in as subscriber does. When we first set up the controllers, we had allow edit and allow add to return true because we were not implementing ACL at that time. We can now remove those and let our ACL settings take over. By default, our manager and administrator do not have the new Action View access, so let's give them that by modifying Manager's Action View to allow. Let's test out our admin permissions. Check that Manager does not have admin interface access and Administrator does. We do not see the Good Cook component listed. Now set the Manager access to allowed and re-log in. As Manager, we can now access the Good Cook component. We will now modify the toolbar to hide buttons which are not appropriate for the user's access level. Let's open Views, Recipes, view.html.php. We will replace the Add Toolbar function code with this code that checks the user's permissions and displays the buttons based on that. And we will do the same for the Recipe toolbar. Let's also add code to display a message to the user about any unauthorized access. In our next exercise, we will add batch processing to the component's admin. We want to have the ability to alter the state of multiple recipes at once, so we will enable batch processing in our component. One of the processes we can enable with batch processing is check-in, check-out. So let's first implement that feature in our component. In our install SQL file, we will add two columns to the table, checked out and checked out time. This is all we need to do for the basic check-in, check-out functionality because Joomla includes all the logic needed for check-in, check-out in the classes JModelAdmin and JControllerForm. Since we used those classes when we created our component, we automatically inherited the functionality as soon as the columns were created. Now to enable batch processing, we add one method to our recipe model. Let's open the recipe controller. Our new function is named Batch. We are using a session token to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. Then we check that we are using the recipe model. Next, we set the redirect URL. Joomla provides the rest of the code we need. In the Recipes view, in the Add Toolbar method, we will add toolbar buttons for Publish, Unpublish, and Check-in. Next, we set up some messages for the end user in our language file. Joomla will replace the %s with the number of recipes affected. Let's test out our new code. In the Admin's List screen, select multiple recipes using the checkbox and use the Unpublished button. The recipes now become unpublished. We can also add more involved batch operations, for example, the ability to copy recipes. First, we will add a batch button to the Recipes view. Then we make sure that the built-in modal functionality has been enabled. We will also create a form to display for batch processing and then insert it into our recipes list so it is available when needed. Create the file default_batch.php in the template folder. It's important to note the values C and M for the radio button in Batch Move Copy. This allows us to use the built-in batch copy operation in Joomla and must be set to C for copy and M for move. And then load the new template file from default.php. Let's test out this copy move batch process. We'll select two recipes, select move, and the category. Now we can copy and move our recipes. In our next exercise, we will enable front-end editing of our recipes. We need to be able to add and edit recipes on the site's front end, so we will create a new view in the site component for submitting and editing recipes. In the front-end Views folder, we'll create a subfolder called Form. View.html.php will contain our form's edit logic. Here we have code to gather data and check permissions. In the Forms template folder, the files are similar to the admin component's recipe view, so let's copy those files to the front-end Form folder. We will also need to have a file named edit.xml, which will allow us to create a menu item for adding recipes. In edit.php, we need to enable some JavaScript functionality which was enabled by default for the admin screens, but must be enabled explicitly for the front end. We also add buttons for save and cancel in the toolbar since the front end does not contain a default toolbar to display them in. We will remove the sidebar where the published option was displayed because there is no space for it here. We will deal with this option in the recipe.xml file. With the view in place, we need to create a model for it in models form.php. We will base our class on the already existing Good Cook model recipe from the backend, which contains all our save logic already. The only change we will need to make is to the getItem method in order to ensure the correct item is loaded. We will also need to create an XML file defining the form fields. The file is models.forms.recipe.xml, and it can be copied from the backend with the following change. Move the published field definition from the main section to the publishing options field set. This will move the field itself from the main screen to the publishing options tab. We can now create a menu link to display the form for recipe creation. We can also display an edit link on the recipe page. For that, we will modify views recipe view.html.php. We add the method allowEdit to the class to perform our ACL checks to see if the user is able to edit the document. This can be saved into the recipe object as the property canEdit, and if the user is allowed to edit it, we create the edit link and save that to the edit link property. We then modify views recipe template default.php to display the edit link if the canEdit property is true. With all this in place, we can now display the edit screen. However, in order to save changes, we will need to write a new controller to be used when editing recipes. We will extend jcontroller form in comgoodcook controllers recipe.php. So let's create this new folder and file and add these methods. Add, allowEdit, cancel, edit, getModel, getRedirect to item append, getReturnPage, postSaveHook, and save. With the new controller in place, save and cancel will now work. In our next exercise, we will begin template development. We want a layout for our website not found in Joomla's default templates, so we will build a custom template for Joomla. We'll begin by creating a folder called Cook Plate in the Templates folder. Our template folder will have these subfolders: CSS, HTML for layout overrides, images, JS for JavaScript, language, IMG for icons from the Bootstrap framework. Joomla includes the Bootstrap CSS and framework in the default template Protostar, and many components also utilize it, so we will use it as well. In our templates main directory, we will have these files: template details.xml, favicon, template preview, template thumbnail, and index.php. In template details.xml, we list the files, folders, module positions, and languages for the Joomla installer. Within the config tag, we can add fields to provide parameters, so let's add fields for setting the logo as either an image file or text. In the templates index.php file, let's retrieve the saved parameters. If there is an image file set, we will use that as the logo, otherwise we will use text in place of the logo. Next, we will enable the Bootstrap framework, instantiate some basic Joomla objects, and add the style sheet. We will also assign the variables that will be added to the CSS classes on the body tag. Even if we don't plan to use these variables, some components are written assuming these classes have been set, so let's include these. In the document head, the JDoc statement will output any style sheets, JavaScript, and metadata that has been added to the document object. The body class will use the options set out in the previous variables. The content div is the main section of the website page where content will be displayed from a component. Since we are using Bootstrap CSS, which defines widths in up to 12 columns, band 12 uses the full page width. The JDoc statement for message will display error and other user messages. We can download any style sheet from Bootswatch, so let's use the popular Amelia theme. Save the bootstrap.css file to our CSS folder as template.css. Now let's zip up our files, install the template, assign our template as a default, and select the logo image. Let's take a look at the site. Now we have a whole new look. In our next exercise, we will add module positions to our template. We need to be able to publish modules in our template, so we will add code for module output. A module position that every template should have is debug. Debug is a special position used by Joomla to display application debugging messages when troubleshooting. So we'll use the JDoc statement to create this module position just before the body closing tag. Anywhere in our HTML code where we want a module position, we use this JDoc statement, type equals modules, and the name of the position. Let's also add a footer module position. Remember to add these new module positions to our template details.xml file. Now when selecting a position for a module, footer will be listed in the drop-down for the cook plate template. In our footer module's JDoc statement, we set the style as none. This is called the module Chrome. The setting none will display raw module content with no formatting tags. Module Chrome style XHTML would add a div tag and module title to the module output, giving us more flexibility for styling it with CSS. Module Chrome HTML5 will output the module content in a similar format, except that it allows the admin to set the tag and header to be used in the module parameters. The rounded Chrome adds 4 nested div tags, enabling a designer to create a box with rounded corners. The table style outputs the module in a table cell. We can create our own custom Chrome in the file modules.php in our template's HTML subfolder, and using the function name modchrome_foo, where foo is the name of our Chrome. We can also pass attributes to our custom module function, as in this example, color equals blue. We would get the attribute color using the attributes array. There may be times when we want a module position to collapse if no modules have been published in that position. In that case, we can use count modules to test for any active modules. If there are no modules published in the footer position, the divs and HR tags will not be displayed.